And honestly, Curry, this is what gives me hope, and this is what gives me the courage to raise my hand in this race, is because the people that I talk to every single day think like you and me. They are exhausted. They want something that is more hope filled. And unless someone raises their hand and says, I'll collect you all, like, let's find our meeting place, unless they're organized, then we will continue to feel like we are the fringe voters rather than the majority. And my job for the next year is to make sure that at least Tennesseans know that those who believe like you and me, who want common sense laws and common sense leadership, we are still the majority. We just have to find our way to each other.
Welcome to A Theology of Hustle. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and follow me at Theology of Hustle on Instagram. Now, let's get to work. Well, Dr. Lauren Pinkston, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. It's great to get to meet you.
Thanks. These are some of my favorite conversations to have.
I love it. Let's kick off and just have you give the quick bio. I know that might be a tall task with all the things that you do, all the hats that you wear, but do you mind just giving us a quick rundown?
Sure. I'm Tennessee born and raised, and small town, but always with my eyes on the rest of the world. And so, from the time I was little, was thinking, why do people act the way that they do? What drives their behaviors? What drives the ways that they think and that they believe? And so was always hungry to go and understand how different the world was, and whether or not I actually had a premium on truth, as I was being told. So I remember being about 5 years old and looking at a National Geographic magazine, and it was during a massive drought in the Horn of Africa, and just thinking, this is so unjust. This is not right that I'm living in a very stable. Obviously, I didn't have the words for this at 5, but just it felt inequitable to me, and I didn't know what to do with that. And so my family has always laughed lovingly, that for years my prayer around the dinner table was, Lord, be with the kids that have to drink muddy water and don't have a mother or father. And I didn't know what to do with the fact that I had that and others didn't. So after college, I moved to South Carolina and started grad work. I was teaching at the time, but was focused on getting overseas. And so I started a PhD program in international family and community studies, basically international community psychology and community development. Landed in Southeast Asia, worked in Laos for 5 years, held a short research desk at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, but was more grassroots, working with anti-trafficking practitioners there and starting businesses for survivors. Found my way back in the United States in 2019, living here again. I've got 4 kids, so they were born and raised on 3 different continents, but got to be a professor in Nashville for a little while in the College of Business, and have spent a lot of my time researching what it looks like to be good employers to people who have been exploited for work in the past. And so what does it look like to create healing-centered, regenerative workplaces? And now, as I'm sure we'll talk about today, I'm finding my path into government and into political office. So my career path doesn't make sense, Curry. I have been, I don't have a linear trajectory that is easy to track on a CV, but I'm starting to see all those pieces come together now that I'm almost 40.
Well, I love that. I mean, you're welcome in this space. This space is for people who have non-traditional career paths, and so I love that. I think that's a lot of the fun I get to do, is like tracing these stories and exploring how God has used these stories in order to really, bring about the good that you're doing in the world, the work. So let's start at the beginning, I guess. I mean, you talked about in childhood, you'd always had this feel for justice and just a sense of inequity, that there was inequity in the world, right? And so as you get into college and stuff, I mean, people that go into like justice fields, a lot of times it's really hard to kind of find your footing on like, what are you actually passionate about? Because I'm sure you're passionate about most everything justice related. So how did you go about sort of forming who you were going to be working with?
Well, I'm an Enneagram 8. So if your listeners are Enneagram fans, as I'm sure, many are, I am drawn to the darkest, hardest places. And so the places that feel the most risky and the most challenging, those are where my natural bent is. But I really became aware of human trafficking probably around 2007, 2008. It was kind of the beginning of the conversation becoming more national. And so that was on my radar. I was getting a degree in education, and then I was teaching fourth grade in South Carolina while my husband was in medical residency. And I remember a conversation that we had, and he said, "Lauren, if you could do anything in the world, what would you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'd really like to work with the most at risk populations and learn what's going on there. And so I think I'd like to be in the anti-trafficking field." And he was like, "Well, then go do it." And I just started putting out feelers, and eventually found my way there through research.
Yeah, I love that. What about as you were growing up and you talk about your family being supportive? What did you experience in the church as you sort of like talked about these sort of things? And I assume growing up in the church, how was that received?
Hmm. Well, here's what I'll say. I grew up in a very conservative, evangelical, you know, culture. And as a woman in Tennessee, that was always a challenge. How do I voice the concerns that I see, and how do I make anything happen here without a space? I don't get to be in the rooms where decisions are made. I don't get asked how we're programming or how we're organizing our church, or our faith expression at all. And so I assumed that the darkest parts of the world were happening outside of the church. And pretty soon I began to realize that they were inside of our walls as well. We just weren't talking about them. And so I can say with cloaked a bit in this conversation, but I have, the most tragic trafficking case that I have ever witnessed in the entire world, on screen, off screen, in real life, whatnot, is it happened within my own faith community. And it involved individuals that I knew and that were employed by faith institutions that I was a part of. And so, being someone who was that close to the hurt and the harm that exist in the world, and then recognizing it, in my own backyard, I think it takes another step of courage to say, I realize that the reason that we don't talk about these things is because we don't want to hurt our reputation in the world as believers. And that is the thing that is hurting our reputation more than anything, is our lack of our ability to hold our brothers and sisters accountable for not just harm that they're producing, but crimes that they are organizing.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I feel like it needs a little bit of space. I don't want to just like brush past that. I'm feeling a little grief here.
Sure, yeah.
Just you telling that little bit of the story. Um, what is it? What is it about? I don't understand it. And I know you talk about, this maintaining of our, witness in the world, which is, so ridiculous because once this comes out, the witness in the world is absolutely blown apart. Like it doesn't make any sense. Is it just that like white evangelicals in general have just held a lot of power in the like? Is it a power? Like what in the world? Why does this keep happening to us?
Yeah. Well, what gives me hope is the fact that we are, as white evangelicals, we are a part of the problem, but we are not the whole problem. And so, around the entire world, the most conservative cultures and the most conservative communities see the greatest amounts of incest, the greatest amounts of harm and abuse. And that is a part of the culture that is baked into protecting a small group that is quite exclusive, right? That feels safer when others are not included, that feels safer when the narrative is controlled, that feels safer when doctrine is black and white. And that happens within Christian circles, that happens within Islamic circles, within Jewish circles, within Buddhist circles. That happens in all religions. Obviously, it's my responsibility to speak from the inside out of the culture that I'm a part of. And so that's where I feel particularly responsible, for my part in the narrative. And so, yeah, it's led to some interesting conversations and some interesting relationship challenges for sure. As I've sought to keep unity with the denomination that I was raised in, and the people who are the ones who raised me with love and care. And also don't always know what to do with me.
Yeah, good. I don't want to belabor this too much, but why choose to lean into relationship as opposed to just kind of walk away and kind of burn the relationships down?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the easiest thing to do, right? And I think that it's hardest to love the people that you know inside and out. I and part of why I moved overseas was probably part of me trying to find my way outside of a very exclusive circle, a group of people that knew everybody. We could relationship map across the country if you were a part of my faith denomination, and I think that that's beautiful and powerful in some ways, and it can be quite limiting in some ways. And I wanted to be able to stretch my arms. I wanted some breathing space, and I wanted to have the freedom to ask questions. My 4 years of Bible college were probably the hardest 4 years of my life from a spiritual perspective. And then as we were being called back to the United States. And I was really wrestling with God on this. And I was like, I have learned a tonal language. I'm speaking a tonal language 90% of my day. Like
Yeah.
why would you lead me to learn this, to have such deep relationships and then take me back? I was like, God, you can take me anywhere. You can take me to California, Minnesota, Syria would be great. And he was like, if you have not learned how to love the place that you've come from, then you haven't actually learned to love at all. And that has been the burden. That has been the sanctifying mission of my life for the last 7 years as I've made my way back here. And I've had to rely on God. I've had to be truly dependent, upwardly dependent on the Lord to give me a love for the people that it was easy to walk away from and that I wanted to walk away from. And he said, "You're not free to abandon. You're not free to
Yeah. Well,
abandon."
and for all intents and purposes, had every right to in a lot of ways, from what it sounds like. I mean, just a very outsider
Sure.
perspective there.
Well, and in
Nobody
today's
would have faulted you, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Well, and in today's popular psychology, I mean, that's what we're
Yes.
moving towards, right? Is
Yep.
boundaries and protecting yourself. And I think that there's a place for that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So don't hear me saying walk back into an abusive, harmful situation, but people weren't being explicitly abusive towards me. I just saw the world in a different way. And now that I have chosen to really reunite with my faith culture and to worship with them on a Sunday morning, it's been a choice to not express all of the freedoms that I have in Christ. Right? I feel much more free theologically than most of the people that I spend my Sundays with, but I've come to appreciate a lot of the teachings in the New Testament where it's, yes, you're free to eat meat, but you don't need to go and do that with your Jewish rabbis. Yes, I know that I'm free to wear sleeveless shirts, but I'm not going to do that in a Buddhist temple. There are things that I am free to do, but I don't know that the Lord gives me the freedom to flaunt that in the face of people who aren't quite there yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. You bring up the popular psychology of the day. My wife's a therapist and we'd spend a lot of time talking about this. Almost this there's this toxicity, right? So it's like if somebody's being toxic, which for some people means just like barely disagreeing with them on anything, right? It's like this permission structure to write them off, as opposed to, setting healthy boundaries, right? Sometimes we need healthy boundaries, but our culture is so easy to write people off, and then you sit behind a screen or whatever and just like lob bombs as opposed to being like incarnational, you know what I mean? Like being with other people. And so we've gotten it twisted. And so I appreciate that testimony quite a bit there. It's good.
Yeah, yeah.
It's good stuff. So let's jump into getting over, like, living overseas and all of that stuff. Can you walk us around like a little of that journey? It sounds like a lot happened in those years, but maybe a rundown of kind of where you were, what you were doing, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think I probably had in my mind what the ultimate Christian looked like, right? It looks like a missionary. It looks like somebody who is, just spending all of their days trying to get everyone to heaven. And so in my mind, I thought, well, that means that I definitely don't need to touch business at all. That means that I don't need to have anything to do with money. And I tried honestly. I tried for most of my life to be poor. I was like, well, I'll be a school teacher and I'll be poor. And then I married a doctor, and I was like, well, we're not going to be, he's not going to be a doctor in the United States. We'll go overseas. And then we had a church that reached out to us and fully funded our entire family, and gave a sixth of their church's budget to to our family's work overseas. And
Wow.
so that offered a good amount of cushion for us. And then when we moved back, I don't just all of these things that I think I was trying to perform my way to making God proud with me, and I had to untangle a lot of that. And what I realized, working in a communist country specifically, was that the protections that we have in the United States around entrepreneurship and around enterprise did not exist. And so I was coming from my grad school perspective, like, don't you want a micro loan? Do you want to start your own business? And they were like, no, I want to work for you. And I was like, no, I don't, I came here so that, I could just support, you guys. And what I realized was that, well, first, only about 8% of people are actually entrepreneurs. So the risk, even in a good economy, to be an entrepreneur is still very great. But there is something to be said for people just wanting to work, move their hands, and make a living and go home to their families without the risk of running a business. But at the end of the day, the thing that had driven so many people almost exclusively to the point of exploitation was the need for work. And so they had migrated in search of work, or they had been sent by their parents to the capital city in search of work. And so those vulnerabilities were all surrounding the economy. And so it's true that economic crimes, if we're going to address those, then we need economic solutions. And how do we move forward through those? So, I sat on the board for Freedom Business Alliance for a while, and that was the mission that we drove home, was that economic crimes demand economic solutions. And so for me, that meant that I needed to go back to business, and I needed to better understand what it looked like to provide enterprise solutions for people who were in search of good work. And that's honorable, right? That attaches back to the Hebrew concept of avodah, which is that our work is our worship, and those things are interchangeable. And the ways that we move our bodies and our hands are ways that we reflect the image of God back into the world. And I think that that's an incredibly powerful invitation, and so humbling that the Lord would invite us to be co-creators with Him in making good in this world.
Yeah, I mean, bonus points for laying out a theology of work. I very much appreciate that. That's good stuff there. So in your so you done a ton of justice work, economic justice. It sounds like a lot of human trafficking work. It sounds like what are you doing? What were you doing in some of these fields, like anti-human trafficking? I mean, what were you doing in the world? I guess in regards to that.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably make it sound really nice and beautiful, but I was painting walls, and I was like creating logos on Canva, and I was trying to convert US dollars to Lao Keep to Thai baht, and driving trucks across Thailand to go to IKEA right when it opened so I could race back across Thailand and get across the Lao border in time to put it, there was a lot of non-glamorous moments of teaching women how to do macrame in my living room, and trying to figure out how to convert centimeters and inches to make sure that we were using dimensions correctly in pillows, and how to get products to market. um, so a lot of flipping of storefronts, a lot of renovating. We At the time that I was living in Laos, we grew our team, we grew our operation, and I was completely under the leadership of an incredible Lao woman who, to this day, is just such a mentor to me. But she is, we grew what the operation to 4 different businesses, about 86 Lao staff and 16 expat staff. And so we had a lot of really cool things going on. But I was helping make sure that the wearable goods store was running well, and the beauty salon, we had a high-end beauty salon that we also uh, opened up, and a coffee shop. So making sure that those businesses were meeting the needs of the customers that were coming in.
Okay. So, I mean, so would you say there's sort of a one-to-one correlation between this like economic development or having economic freedom and keeping people from being trafficked?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, and this is my greatest critique of the anti-trafficking industry. I say industry, I should say field. But you can rescue, quote unquote, rescue someone out of an exploitative situation all day long, but you create a vacuum for the next person to come in. And we watched this in northern Laos with an organization that came in, and they were pulling children out of brothels, quote unquote, beer shops as they were called, and they were giving them an education and they were feeding them, and immediately parents just started sending their kids into the brothels so that they could be, quote unquote, rescued and put into a school and be given food, right? So uh, that is all. There's always, anytime you try to solve a problem, you're going to create new ones. But that was one that probably could have been avoided if we were just going to those communities directly and investing in education and investing in jobs. And so, that's unfortunate that children had to be used as, has had to be prostituted in order to be given a good education.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it sounds like what we see a lot in like sort of this white saviorism concept where it's like coming in, I'm going to come in, I'm going to do what I think is best. And see what happens, as opposed to like coming in and empowering people who actually live there to do
Mhm.
that work. Right? There's a vast difference between those two ways of solving problems, and one involves us feeling good about ourselves, and one involves us actually solving problems, I guess. So
Right, right. It's hard to listen first, right? And it's
yeah.
and it's backwards from the ways that we have done things in the United States from an enterprise perspective, but it's also opposite of the ways that we've done things in the church, unfortunately. And too many times we make our plans in the church and then we're like, Lord, please bless this. Isn't this aligned with what your mission is? Rather than sitting in relationship with God and allowing God to speak into us a vision that He has for a community, and then asking if we're aligned with the mission that we're joining him in.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that correlation there to the church, because I mean, this stuff is everywhere, and I think some of our this is a total aside, and this may not make it or whatever. I'm just going to go down this track because I'm here.
Mhm.
I'm preaching this week on David and Bathsheba, the story of David and Bathsheba, and I just keep coming back to like King David and his prosperity. Like when he was running from Saul, and Saul was trying to like kill him. Uh, like he was doing like what he was supposed to do in so many ways, and then he gets like builds this kingdom up, and all of a sudden isn't going to war, right? And this is when he like trips himself up, and I just have this feeling that we do not wrestle enough with, in general, our prosperity in America, and prosperity and power, and what those things like cause us to do. Does that
Oh
ring
my,
true for you? Make sense?
absolutely. And I could,
Good.
gosh, we could talk for hours about David. I find him so fascinating. He was one of the people in scripture that actually healed my issue with wealth, and dealing with money, because he was a man of great wealth. And I'll defer to the Hebrew scholars on this one. I'm not sure if the phrase that we repeat all the time, that he was a man after God's own heart, I don't know if how that translates, and if that means that his heart was modeled after the heart of God, or he was a man who was pursuing, the heart of God. But I do think that David's time in the wilderness, when it was Nathan, right, that came and said, "You're the man," right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yep. Mhm.
and I think that David's time in the wilderness was what allowed David to look at Nathan and know exactly what he meant when he said that, right? Because it was I would assume that that wasn't the first day that he was uncomfortable with the changes that were happening in his heart, the changes that were happening with his relationship with God. I would assume that um, there had been some touches before that moment with Nathan where he was like, "I don't really like where this is going. I don't really like who I am."
Yeah. Can you unpack a little bit more about what you mean about David changing the way you think about money and wealth?
Sure. I had, as I said earlier, had been trying to run from money and wealth my whole life. I grew up in a very comfortable home, and I had what a lot of people call the white man's burden, right? Of, I don't know what to do with this wealth that I have and other people don't have it, so I should just give it all up. And it took multiple people speaking into me saying, Lauren, wealth is not always bad. The Lord has given you, He's given you the ability to be educated. He's given you the ability to be articulate. He's given you the financial means to have a platform to say some things. And if you squander that, does that make you more holy because you're poor and you're sitting in, sackcloth and ashes? Or does that mean that you're squandering the things that the Lord has given you to do in order to advance his love and mercy in the world? And and I remember specifically a therapist that spoke to me, and she was like, do you think that David was a bad guy because he was a king and because he was wealthy? And I was like, well, no. Um, and so that was kind of the unraveling of that for me, that
Mm.
really helped to reframe the way that I thought about the privilege that I'd been given.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate you unpacking that because I'm wrestling with that literally right now in that exact text. Because yeah, you're right, and I think the propensity of those things to corrupt us, we do not take that seriously enough at the same time, right? So it's this like really tricky balance. Like there's almost with that privilege, because comes like it's a much bigger burden in a lot of ways, and like maintaining your fidelity to those things you started out doing, I think, becomes more of a burden. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to give credit to Abigail if I can too. I told you we could hang out in the story of David for a while, but probably my
I love it.
favorite story in scripture is the one of Abigail. And this happened. Um, I came across the story because I was probably in the darkest place that I've ever been, just personally, when I was in Laos. I had been in Laos about a year, and I was like, Lord, what am I doing here? Like, I can't make myself useful in your kingdom. And I was dealing with the missionary culture, and I called a mentor of mine in the United States. She was in her 80s. And I said, Dottie, what do I do as a woman? I don't want to homeschool my kids, and I don't want to sit and bake bread. And I don't like, that's just not what I want to do. And she was like, first of all, Lauren, you need to stop being friends with the American missionaries because they're stuck in the 1950s, and you need to go find a good German woman and be her friend. I was like, okay,
That's
say
great advice.
and I thought I was probably wanting Dottie to pet me a little bit and be like, "It's okay, you're great." And she said, "Don't call me back until you've gone back to scripture and you have read every single account of every woman that you can find, and you have discerned what the Lord had to say to those women and how that connects back to you." And so when I got to the story of Abigail, I it just stopped me in my tracks because she's married to this no, I appreciate peaceful language, but he was an idiot. So she's married to Nabal, and he's like not a man of peace, right? Like he's drunk all the time and he's wreaking havoc, but he's lording his power over her village. And
Yeah.
David is out in the wilderness, and he's with his mighty men, and they come and they're hungry. They've been trying to protect the people from Saul's army, and they've been trying to protect themselves, but they have served as protectors for Abigail's village. And they come and they ask for some things from the people, and Nabal's like, bump that, nope, you can't have our sheep or whatever. And so Abigail sees, like, she can clearly see what's about to happen because she is a feeler, and she is like, women are emotional, right? We can just tell what's about to take place. And she knows that men need to eat, right, to kind of calm down. Like, if there were Snickers bars, she would have been giving him one. But anyways, she
I love that.
she sees Nabal coming, and he's drunk, and so she's like, everybody, I'm going to take charge for a minute, let him sleep off his drunkenness. And she makes all of these fig cakes, and she gets animals together, and she gets her servants together, and they go and they meet David on the mountainside as he is coming to attack her village. And she meets him in peace, and she bows down and calls him Lord, and she tells him to eat, and she offers her hospitality to him and his men. And she warms him over from that moment, not in anything other than a radical hospitality that recognizes who he is and what his physical needs are. And he makes her his wife, and he goes and kills her husband. So, like, I have often wondered, how Abigail played into the story later on as David came to be king, and how I just have often wondered, did she tap him regularly and be like, "Do you remember who you used to be? Do you remember who you were when we met on this mountainside?" And how often she called him back to his truest self.
I love that. That's such a good insight into that very odd, honestly, passage. Like that whole narrative is just very strange in general. So yeah, thanks for that. We might need to like have a whole podcast where we just like run through the David story, right? Because I'm just feeling that now. No, it's when I became a Christian, or like brought myself. When the Lord was ready for me, I was 19. I called my mom, and she knew a pastor. So I said, "Hey, you're with your pastor. What should I start reading? Like I'm a brand new, trying to figure out the Bible. Where are all the kings and stuff?" And he sent me to First Samuel, and just like First and Second Samuel has just been my like that. That's like my go-to. Like when things are hard, I go back to Samuel, the Samuel narrative, and just remember God's goodness and God's kingdom, honestly, and this propensity we have for thinking that we know what is best for the kingdom. So
Well, it is so
yeah,
relevant still today. I mean,
yeah.
I find it very encouraging as well with just the tendency that people have to want a king, the tendency that
Amen.
people have to want to have
Amen.
a government
Yes.
that is powerful and that can protect them and that reflects their religion. And I find it comforting, even, just in this political state that we're in, to watch how the Lord blessed or cursed the lack of theological clarity that people had.
100%. And it's so clear to me. Like people have always just wanted a strongman, like the strongman theory of politics. Like we've always gone there. Like, and it's right there. I mean, God like lays it out and exactly what the king's going to do to you. You say you want a king. Here's what a king's about to do. And Saul like proves all of that true over the next, I don't even know, 15, 20 chapters, probably more. And it's just so it's just there. I get frustrated that like people don't marinate enough in that First Samuel through King's Chronicles. Like that whole narrative is about what we're dealing with. Like it's politics. It's God's kingdom versus the politics of humanity. I think so.
It's
Yeah,
baked into our DNA, unfortunately. I
just
mean,
is.
we
It
began
is.
as conquerors, and the unfortunate reality is that as the church left Palestine and it moved west, the further west that it came, by the time it got here, it had turned into a full-blown enterprise. And so, unfortunately, we've tied that to our national identity, we've and it's been really effective because what I'm recognizing, even in the last few weeks, that people they're still confused about what the term Christian nationalism means, and they don't understand how much the American flags in our churches and the beholdenness to certain political parties has crept in to inform our beliefs about God.
100%. I had like this whole other, I wanted to jump back on the story train, but it feels like we're already here. Do we just need to talk about this right now? Because
Let's do it. Let's
it
jump
feels
in.
like, okay. So let's talk about it. So maybe we should intro it with kind of unpacking a little bit of your, we'll just jump the story to today. Where are you at today? What has your story kind of led you to at this point?
Well, again, it's not linear, but it is. In 2016, my family and I, we were still living in Laos, so we were there in the spring, and I remember being in my village office as there was a communist election going on, and I watched people in my neighborhood. Obviously, I couldn't vote, but I watched them come in, and all of the Communist Party leaders were shown on the wall, and it was already shown to them who they were supposed to vote for. And so a couple of days later, we flew to Uganda and we were adopting our oldest child. And gosh, we could maybe another podcast, or we can just refer people to my season on reforming orphan care on my own podcast, Upwardly Dependent podcast, where we talk about reforming orphan care and interracial families and adoption and all of that. But we did land in Uganda, and we were there for 4 months. And 2 days before we flew out, or excuse me, 2 days after we were flying out, Museveni was elected to be president again. And he had all of his political opponents under house arrest, and the roads were shut down. And we had to use a VPN to get on any socials because all the social media platforms had been disabled in the country. And so we walked through that. And then we get to the United States, and we're here for the November election in 2016. And I guess it goes without saying that that year absolutely solidified for me that this American experiment, that we are always curious, is our democracy going to last? It was very clear to me at that time that I needed to have my eyes more open
Mm.
to the direction that voters were thinking, the way that people were feeling. And so I have been in and out of different roles and learning in different communities around the independent movement since then, and more, I would say, more pointedly over the last 4 years here in Tennessee to understand what are our challenges that we face with a supermajority in our Tennessee legislature, and
Yes.
how our people who deserve to have a voice blocked from having their voice be heard because there are not options, right? And we don't have ballot access. And when your party leaves you, what do you do as a moderate, solid, values oriented person? And I think people are feeling that on both sides of the political spectrum.
Yep.
And so yeah, I guess this is where I tell your listeners that I'm thrilled to jump into a new season of my life and career. I have worked my way out of all of my contracts and plan to start at the local level in politics, like most people should, and I would still recommend. But the doors, as I started knocking, just continued to open wide, and we are thrilled to be launching a campaign for the governor's race here in Tennessee as an independent who has an incredible team behind me. But even more than that, I think we've got the majority of Tennesseans who are looking for an option, looking for someone that they can sleep well at night, knowing that they voted for character and for solid leadership when I'm not seeing that on the ballot right now.
Yeah. Very much so. Congratulations. That's very exciting. It's interesting. Your story, God just kind of opens the doors. I mean, it's like you try to go one way and God's like, nope, here it is. And it's just like wide open. There's nothing else to really do but go for it. It seems so.
It's a blessing and it's a curse. I have, I will say that I have tried for so long to uh, I've begged God to make me good at baking sourdough or something, and I had this panic moment during COVID where there was no bread in the aisle, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to learn to bake." And I mean, you could drop me in the middle of a war zone, and I would start strategizing, and I would feel like, "Okay, this is what we can do. Everybody, we got this." But if you put a recipe in my hand that requires me to like level flour on a measuring scoop, my blood pressure goes up immediately. So I don't know what that means, but I will say that I've tried for a long time begging God to give me any other burden in this world than being public facing, than being, a voice of reason for the people. And He has not relieved me of that burden, but He has recently given me a peace to know that there are a lot of people in government right now that are begging God to make them good at governing, and they're probably the ones that should be at home baking sourdough.
Ooh, man. Yes. I love that. That's a great flip there. What are some of the challenges that you're looking at to an independent run for governor in the state of Tennessee?
There's so many. The most glaring one is that voters have just been so conditioned to believe that they only have two choices, and that a two-party system is what we will always have in this country. And truthfully, to get a third party on the ballot in all 50 states with 50 different legal strategies is almost insurmountable.
Yep.
It is taking time, and there are people who are working on that. What I have bumped up against already is the fact that Republicans think that I am a Democrat in sheep's clothing, and the Democrats will say that I'm a Republican, an undercover Republican. But the truth is that I've voted across ballots since my early 20s. And I've always looked for principled oriented candidates, even if they didn't align with me on every issue, because I think the power of being able to bring people to the table and the power of being diplomatic in our decision making process is what serves all people. And that is the power of a democracy. But if we are power hungry, right? And if we're trying to make everyone in our country like us, then it will not last for long. Societies have not been able to sustain that kind of power struggle. And so I think this is the right year. This is the right time. And we have likely female frontrunners, white female frontrunners on both sides of the aisle. And so, as a white female, I thought, well, let's give people a third option, and we're going to be putting kitchen table issues back in the public square from day one of this race. And I'm excited to just spend the next year listening to Tennesseans, meeting people across the state, and reviving a pride in the state that really has, we've lost the narrative of who we are. And that's why we're feeling so isolated. And it's time to take that back.
I love it. That's great. I'm so excited. Yeah, that gets me very excited. I have a little tirade that I preached on politics here not too long ago. I have a little tirade because I think we've really messed up words around the political discussion, because what we say is that everybody's against like politicians and politics, and we say that politics is broken, all of this stuff, and really what we're articulating is partisanship. Is it? So we conflate the two terms. We call politics partisanship when what we actually mean is partisanship. And so politics is just this way we sort of like structure the government. And this is the way we make things work for people. It's the partisanship and the dividing line that you were talking about that has like really got us off course because people see red or blue, like you said. And so I love this independent spirit because it breaks us out of that binary. And when we get in the binary, like the people who talk about these issues a lot of times, like you see these parties flip all the time, and like it seems like no one like is ideological anymore. Like no one has a straight ideology. It's just like whatever works for now, we're gonna do, as opposed to like what actually helps people do better, right?
That's right. Yeah. And whatever one person says, they, the other party will just put a stake in the ground and say the opposite. But in the end, we all start sounding like the same people. And so if you say my body, my choice, it's like, oh no, are you talking about abortion? Or uh, are you talking about vaccines? Are you talking about, I don't know what you're talking about, and
Yeah.
everyone just starts to sound the same in the end. And it really does isolate. And it means that the most extreme 15% on either side of the nation have control over the narrative. And then in a heavily red or a heavily blue state, it means that 15% of the people are controlling the legislative efforts for the entire people. And that to me is the greatest injustice that I see in the world, in my backyard. And I've always been drawn to areas of injustice. And so here I am, wanting to disrupt the two party system because it's having unnecessary impact on our communities, and it means that we're falling far behind while other nations are better prepared to deal with the technological boom that we're going to see in the next 5 years.
Yeah. From what you've seen, are states that are more partisan, leaning one way or the other, more ripe for an independent candidate than states that are a little more purple?
Actually, yes, I do
Okay.
think so. And so we had President Bush's comms director wrote an incredible article. Karl Rove wrote a great article for the in the Washington Post recently, saying that independents were going to be the turning point in this election, in this midterm. We see more women who are running for governor across the country than ever before. We have data that shows from Gallup over the last 3 years that independents have remained consistent at 46% of the electorate. And so I think what surprises people is that they think that we're 50-50 Republican or Democrat, but people are very vocal at this point and willing to say that they are neither. And so that leaves the Republicans with about 28% of the vote and Democrats with about 27% of the vote. And the people who are most afraid of independence are Republicans in red states and Democrats in blue states, because they know that they only have about a quarter of the vote.
Interesting. So how, one issue that I think is really prevalent in our society is the federal problem, right? So like all politics now is federal politics. Like all we want to talk about is like Trump, Biden, or Trump, Harris, like ad nauseum. It's infuriating. How do you? I mean, I assume being an independent in a state, as a state, running for a state wide office lends itself to this. But how do you get away from that like national political conversation?
Yeah, I think it's tragic that we have school board members who are running their campaigns on the southern border.
Crazy,
Maybe
crazy.
that in Tennessee, like that just doesn't make any sense, right? And so that's a huge part of what we're talking about on this campaign, and is that we need less of DC and Tennessee. That our community conversations should be leading our state investments, and that our state governments should be determining federal priorities. And these local led efforts, and we need to do this in Tennessee first. Like our state government has been running in a way that is frustrating our local communities, right?
Yeah.
So we have to model that from this campaign on day one, and then we need to model it from executive leadership in the state. But really, we need trickle up economic opportunities instead of trickle down economic consequences, as I say. And so the federal government has controlled way too much of the narrative, and families are paying for that, and especially small businesses, as we watch the tariff policies really hit there first. I'm most concerned about the conversation we're going to be having about the economy a year from now.
100%. I'd very much agree with that. And it seems like we're slow walking into this. Like somehow, I guess I'm in a bubble. Most Americans are in a bubble, and I'm going to fully admit that. It just seems like that people aren't really talking about it quite yet. I think there's probably a little bit of a lag time to some of this, but like, I mean, I do think we are headed for some pretty serious situations economically. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think people are talking about it. I think politicians aren't talking about it, and
That's a
so
good
that means
distinction.
that
Yeah.
your legacy media stations are not talking about it. But if you're sitting around a dinner table and you are sitting with someone who is a small business owner, or if you have a house church like we've had for several years as well on Sunday evenings, you're hearing directly from small business owners that are saying, "I have no idea how we're going to keep our doors open," and so that's unfortunate, right? That the everyday people who are wanting solutions, they want solutions for their kids in schools. They want solutions for common sense laws. They want solutions for economic stimulus, and we're spending 99% of our time talking about the 1% of the population that we're leading our campaigns on, and that's just incredibly short-sighted.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yes, I love that. Let's talk about some of those ideas though. I don't want to, I would be remiss if I just didn't pick your brain on what are some of those things that you see as these kitchen table issues are fixing some of these woes that we have.
Yeah, well, I will say that I think manufacturing, our division, the manufacturer division that we have, is our greatest tax that we're paying as citizens. And what I mean by that is that we need solutions that can move us forward, but as long as we are talking about those 1% issues 99% of the time, we are watching other nations around the world. We're watching Norway, Sweden, Japan, Indonesia just zoom so far ahead of us with their laws, and in purple states way ahead of us in their laws, kind of talking about AI, talking about quantum physics, talking about the ways that we should be preparing ourselves for the tech boom that's coming our way. And I think it's, when politicians focus on fringe issues in the culture war, then the government ends up killing our state budget because we've got unnecessary lawsuits that are wasting our time and wasting taxpayer dollars. Like middle class, hardworking people don't deserve to have their tax dollars wasted on these petty issues. That's a distraction for a short win battle, and that means that we're losing the war on the future, and that's a problem for me.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Lauren, I want to pick your brain about this just really quick. So there was a lot of time I spent sort of feeling like I could just not worry about politics, right? Like the kingdom of God's bigger than that. I feel like because of our federal national politics, like people are just like checked out. And like, I think your biggest issue are people who just don't care or think that anything can ever be fixed more than it, as much as it is either of these sort of like hyper partisan. Uh, why should we care about any of this stuff, and how give us hope that something could change.
I appreciate that, and
Yeah.
I know it's exhausting, like, and the toll that the last 10 years has had on our nervous systems is great, and you are nervous if you aren't following the news, and you're nervous if you are, and I will
Yes.
say that, um, what gives me hope is that the United States has continued to self-police in some way. We are in a really dark time that you and I have not seen in our lifetime, right?
Yeah.
In our government. But that is not true for the history of the United States. And so looking back in what we've seen throughout our history, even in our short tenure as a nation, we've seen things, we've seen courageous people say, I'm going to raise my hand and I'm going to offer a leadership that can heal the nation that I believe in. And I probably went through a season of my life where I thought, man, the United States has done some really bad stuff around the world. And I don't even know I don't know how to fly my flag proudly because I've lived in a country where we wiped out a whole tribe of men ages 15 to 30 illegally after signing the Geneva Accords and then bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail to pieces. So there are things that I've wrestled through with that, but I have also seen that the investments the United States has made around the world have given other countries hope for something greater. And they're teetering right now because they don't know what to do with the fact that the United States is not this beacon of democracy that they've always seen. There are countries that are still questioning, what should we do? And is this the democracy that we're trying to model ourselves after? But this week, I sat down with an Iranian refugee. He was someone that came to the United States seeking political asylum as a Christian, and I said to him, I said, I'm so sorry for the ways that our culture is not welcoming always. And I'm sorry for the fact that so many refugees find themselves in the United States for 8 years before they're ever invited into an American's home. I'm sorry for all of these things. And he said, I don't, I mean, you can say you're sorry, but he was like, I just want you to know I love this country. I love everything that it has offered to me. I love everything that it has been, that it has allowed for me to do. And I have raised my children to love this country. And so we're in a tough place right now, but it won't always be like this. And and honestly, Curry, this is what gives me hope, and this is what gives me the courage to raise my hand in this race, is because the people that I talk to every single day think like you and me. They are exhausted. They want something that is more hope filled. And unless someone raises their hand and says, I'll collect you all, like, let's find our meeting place, unless they're organized, then we will continue to feel like we are the fringe voters rather than the majority. And my job for the next year is to make sure that at least Tennesseans know that those who believe like you and me, who want common sense laws and common sense leadership, we are still the majority. We just have to find our way to each other.
I love that, Lauren. That is awesome. Thanks for a little hope. I just recorded a podcast with my wife yesterday, just talking about this anxiety that I'm feeling about the world. And like, there's so much going on in the entire world that I can't even process all the stuff I need to process for myself. And just like our nervous systems are just fried. I saw a Times, I think it was a Times Siena poll. People are more concerned about how divided we are politically now than they were even during COVID. I mean, it's gotten so much worse than even COVID. And like, these are things that I think we need to normalize for people. And then, like you said, give people hope. And I love it. It's good stuff. It's
Well,
good
we're going
stuff.
to give people a way to move their bodies to resistance, to do it in a peaceful way, and to do this in a way that connects our hearts and our minds, connects our bodies to our beliefs. And I mean, we are whole people, right? And so there's a way to do this that I think is peaceful. I think that there's a way to do this that shows that common sense really is supreme, and that as a people we are reliant on our dependence on one another, and we may want to fall into our affinity groups, and that's fine for a minute,
Yeah.
but it's not sustainable for us as a race. It's not the way that as humans we can even move our society forward. And so we're learning that, right? And we're learning that that the parallel universes that we exist in on our phones are going to have to cross over at some point. And we're going to run a very heavy digital campaign that's going to try to cross those parallel universes
Yeah.
and really confuse people about where do I categorize her? What do we do here? But the reality is that we are all way too layered to fit into a political agenda. And so we need to bring these conversations back and make it safe to have these conversations again.
Yes. Thank you. Good stuff. What should people do? How follow you? Where should we go?
Well, you can probably Google me at the time that this podcast is coming out. Just Google my name, Lauren Pinkston, and you'll be able to find our campaign website. You'll be able to find me on socials, and we're going to be online every day, except for the mandatory day off I give my staff every week and myself. But we're not. That's been a non-negotiable for this campaign. We are not going to lose our marriages. We're not going to lose our kids. We're not going to lose our souls. And so that's, but besides that, we would love to have anyone engage in the campaign in any way that you want to, even if you're not a Tennessean. Until I bring up the conversation that I would love to change the campaign laws to make it so that you can't donate to a Tennessee campaign outside of the state. We can still take donations outside of the state. So anyone can support what we're doing, and hopefully we can spark some hope for the rest of the nation as well.
Yeah. Amen. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, you good jumping into our final two questions as we wrap up here?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Awesome. My first question is, what is the strangest job that you have ever had?
Oh, well, the one that comes to my mind is cleaning my church building as a teenager. Like I went, as a teenager every Saturday and vacuumed all the floors and took out all the trash and cleaned all the toilets, and I got $20 a week, and I was so happy with that. I thought, I was so thrilled.
That's awesome. That job probably taught you more than you will ever really know. I assume, just the
I
value
had
of
to watch my back.
yeah,
Churches are
yeah.
so scary when you're there by
Oh,
yourself in the dark. It was like,
no doubt.
I don't know. It was like I would always run out at the last minute.
I can see that. I get a little scared up at church by myself still. So I get that. Okay. So my final question then is, what is one piece of advice you would give to somebody looking to bring God's kingdom more into their work?
It's going to have to be surrender.
Hmm.
The thing that God is calling you to do is probably the thing that's most uncomfortable to you. And that's not because God wants us to work outside of our nature. It's because he has a design for us that is truly um, he wants the kingdom to be so multifaceted, and each of us carry something so different about the person of God into the world, and we always want somebody else's ministry or someone else's giftings. And so surrendering to what it is that the Lord has for you is the word that I have needed spoken over to me, and I hope that is a word that someone else can receive listening to this.
Amen. Good stuff. Lauren, it was awesome to get to meet you. I'll send you the follow-up email to get that David podcast where we go through the life of David all set up. Okay.
Let's do it. I love it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for hanging out and listening to A Theology of Hustle. Make sure that you like and subscribe, all the things, and follow me at Theology of Hustle on Instagram. My hope is that this podcast just encourages you in your work, whatever that may be. So until next time, get out there and hustle.